very first classic, and everyone was just, you could feel the fear for people wondering, could hang gliders really fly in afternoon turbulence in the Owens Valley? That was the main thought in my mind this season, the winter before Worthington came up here, was this is the deciding point in hang gliding history. If these things can actually fly in this place, this most turbulent place on Earth, in the most turbulent time of day, then they're going to prove themselves as worthy aircraft, otherwise they're just toys.
In the summer of 1981, the Aoli, the Comet clones, and the Pod people came to the Owens Valley.
Yesterday we had a pilot at launch, fly. He was within 200 feet of the ground, hit a dust devil that he could not see because the ground is still relatively moist, believe it or not, compared to what it will be later when the dust picks up easier. This pilot, Luke's Cassetta, did a full loop upon entering the dust devil at 200 feet from the ground. The loop brought him right back into the dust devil. He was thrown up into a 90-degree wing over and dropped out. Dick pulled it off pretty well and caught the rest of the dust devil and thermal up. Okay, so we avoid dust devils. I don't think that even needs to be said. Dick couldn't see this one yesterday. Eric says he had on polarized sunglasses, and Eric was able to see it.
Eric's got magic glasses.
So the dust devils are, one might say, an obvious danger. The insidious, unobvious danger, and I think the most dangerous thing to do in the Owens Valley is to land at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a calm day in the summertime.
Discovered we all could look out the window and see the switchbacks on Gunther Road. They went up and flew it one fall together, and I think they both got a flight or two in out of it. So then I went up the next spring with a guy named Rene. He was from the Bay Area. His last name was Damasio or something. He was the first guy to thermal and cloud suck off of Gunther. And he was killed that summer when his cable hang strap broke free in turbulence. George set the world's records dynamically after claiming that he wouldn't print 2 months before he did it, and just banging them off like nothing to it in 77. And I remember whispering in his ear as we drove back between Chalfin and my place one time, wouldn't it be great to get a lot of guys up here in Gunther? We could launch 50 of them at a time and have a hang gliding contest instead of a spot landing contest.
The meet began with marvelous weather.
Down here. Whoa! Losing it. What this meet would be like without Larry Tudor in it. I'd be walking all over everybody. That's the way it was last year. By the end of the meet, I had a 25-point lead. I didn't even have to fly the last day. But I did. I won it anyhow.
Where are you going today?
Far. Very, very far. If I get away, that is.
Have you got me as 44?
44.
Yeah.
44.
In the sport of hang gliding, to fly the Owens Valley is regarded as the ultimate experience. We watched Mike Brewer launch his Aeolus into fairly weak conditions. Down he went, down. He went way down around the mouth of Coldwater Canyon, and everybody was absolutely convinced he was gone. How amazed we were to find out that as he pulled his feet out of his harness to land, bam, he got hit by a thermal and took it up to make a world altitude gain record. The English were here. The RAF sent its own hang gliding team. They flew gliders called the Typhoon and the Highway, but they looked so much like the ultralight Comet that everybody on the hill called them Comet clones.
Yeah, you see,
Him fly guy. Boy, these conditions on that Comet over there. Right there, it's a pretty official seal on that. Oh, yellow and blue.
Mike would never fly without his barograph signed and sealed.
3 or 4 days ago, there were about 12 of us left to take off, and I was down at the end here. I took off and I got into my harness and was flying pretty good. Felt a little bump and pushed out a little bit to take the thermal, and bam, I was upside down, looking straight up at Eric Raymond. My legs kind of fell into the sail, and I kind of pulled the bar in, and it dove completely over. It did a loop. And as it came out, because I was pushed out so much, it kind of looped back over again. It did a really high wing over.
Yeah, my name is Mike Brewer, and the other day I made an official world record. It'd be official because of this box right here called the barograph. It was July 22nd, or June 22nd, 1981, and I got low, about to land on my approach, and I caught a thermal and went to 19.2 for a gain of approximately 13.2.
How long did it take you?
18 minutes to gain 13,000 feet.
When serious cross-country hang gliding competitions began at the end of the 1970s, the rigid wings like this Manta fledgling had such a pronounced performance advantage over the flex wings that they were placed in a separate class all to themselves. But Don Partridge designated the Open as an unlimited class open to flex wings and rigid wings. Nobody expected that the flex wings could beat the rigid wings, especially when the pilots were flying wings like Eric Raymond's Sunseed, probably the fastest hang glider in the world. But Larry Tudor of Utah did just that. Flying an Owens Valley Racer, a special Mylar-coated Comet, he won the Open. Eric had to settle for second place.
Several people have launched on the takeoff and being up to the path. Blowing in. Oh, wow! Whoa, a little slow down here.
Not everyone had the right attitude about high-altitude takeoffs. Both the Open and the Classic would be a lapse time contest, with the pilot's time measured from the moment his feet left the ground to the instant he flew over the goal. Only one pilot flew seated. The others flew prone to reduce wind resistance.
All right, start, 328. Okay, are you ready? Okay. Hard. All right. Go.
Task for the day is elapsed time to Coldell with a bent and turn point.
We need a bent and turn point photo. Does everybody know where Coldell is? Okay, well, look on the map.
No one knew what the day's task would be until Don announced it at launch. Then Tom Creechy would give the instructions.
Okay, now wait a minute. Even though the course is north of Benton, we still want Benton as a turn point target. We don't want a picture of basalt. The only thing we're trying to prevent is people from taking off and going over the backside. Actually, I think that'd be a great flight, but we don't want to have to look for you over there.
Here we go.
Okay, my name is Mike Raby from Portland, and I guess I flew about 115 yesterday.
Raby on a Comet and Tom Theta on a Fledge were the first pilots to ever fly more than 100 miles from Gunter.
Somebody left their glider sitting there? Was that somebody launching unhooked or what?
Devil coming right up the hill, right at us.
What happened? Somebody...
All eyes were on the wind dummy, the man who'd make the first flight of the day. Would he go up or would he go down? If conditions looked good and he went up, 20 or 30 gliders would leave the hill within a few minutes. By the end of the Open, we'd seen a flex wing beat the rigid wings. We'd seen men fly more than 100 miles from Gunter for the first time, and a new world altitude gain record for hang gliding had been made. All this, and the summer was only 7 days old. What was yet to come? The Owens Valley gave the first of the pod people a hell of a welcome. They had come to fly their pods in conditions that could scare an ordinary pilot half to death.
No, I don't know. He may munch it in.
But before they could launch in their pods, a sudden windstorm damaged their gliders.
An easy way for us to score this, we're going to pretend you're flying straight north and south on the 118 degree, 20-minute parallel of longitude.
The qualifier started off poorly, with thick clouds forming on the mountain's spine and a stiff wind blowing down the slopes to the valley. Soon the clouds darkened and the gusts would come from any direction. The pilots waited under their wings, hoping for a hole in the clouds so the rain would let up and they could launch. The clouds killed the thermals, but they generated a lift all their own. We called it cloud suck.
After flying up here like there wasn't that many people that flew in the Owens, and I wanted to show some people what this was all about up here, and then the cross-country fever was hitting, and finally put it all together, a place where we could all set the gliders up, and Gunther launch seemed pretty nice. 2 years before, you couldn't have flown from Gunther launch out of the base of the mountains, but then all of a sudden gliders got better and Gunther became a suitable place to fly.
Each year, new designs are brought to the Owens Valley for the ultimate test of their capabilities. We watched the sky with great caution. The week before, a pilot in Albuquerque had been sucked into the belly of a towering cumulonimbus. When the violent cloud had spit out the pieces of his glider, his body was frozen solid. The object of the qualifier was to fly back and forth between the endpoints of the White Mountain Range, Boundary Peak and Black Mountain. The only call Don would make would be whether the pilots would start flying north or south. At the end of the 5 days, the 10 pilots with the best daily scores would win coveted positions in the cross-country classic.
September, I got a good flight in off of Paiute or someplace Arabians and flew to White Mountain Peak, and that was the most dynamic thing I'd ever done in my life up to that time. And then I turned around and flew back home. That, to me, was the best hang gliding flight I could conceive of at that time, even though some people had just flown 100 miles. So I watched the weather pretty close, and the very first day of the very first classic I called White Mountain Peak and Return, and the upwind part was unheard of in hang gliding at that time. Primarily I wanted to call upwind because it seemed to me that what we needed up here in something that could fly in mountainous terrain like this was something that had enough speed range to be able to penetrate the highest significant possibility of wind you might encounter. Of course, we see winds up here intensely strong, but they're usually predictable by looking before you take off. But by and large, most of your winds stay under 50 miles an hour.
Rich Pfeiffer had won the cross-country classic in 1979, then again in 1980. Now he returned in 1981 in hopes of a third straight win. This time, though, he'd be flying a pod. Knowing that he'd be isolated from the familiar sensation of the wind, Rich came early to sharpen his skill in the pod.
Hey, did you catch Pfeiffer's takeoff?
No, I didn't.
Oh, that was great.
How was it?
Well, his tail's bouncing along. His feet leave the ground, okay, and his tail is still dragging, you know. And it's just bam, 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 bam. It's just incredible bouncing along.
How come you're not flying with one of those?
Because they're dead.
Gone from launch at Paiute from 8,000 feet to 18,000 feet in 10 minutes flat, and felt that was very controlled lift. In a cloud suck situation, we have big lift. And of course, there's little tight cores that seem to just yank you skyward by one wingtip. I had Chris Arai on the radio last summer as it reported altitudes through 22,000 feet. It was a situation, he didn't have oxygen. It was a situation where he had gotten one of these really strong thermals and just stuck with it, knowing that he could pop out of the side of it and lose his altitude pretty quickly, which is what he did.
It was ironic that even if Eric Raymond won the qualifier, he wouldn't be allowed to compete in the Classic. 81 would be the last year of separate classes for flex and rigid wings. Jeff Burnett, who placed third in last year's Classic, won the qualifier with a flight of 113 miles, flying a Vampire.
Oh, I'm going to be worldwide famous.
Patrick did obtain a fame of sorts when he performed a rear top landing at Gunter Launch. The pod was the brainchild of Roy Haggard, designer of the Comet. 10 pilots would come to the cross-country Classic with pods and Owens Valley racers to fly for ultralight products.
You know, there's a twist in the board. Right where it goes through the ring, it goes through the ring twice. Roger, General, clear.
They came from South America, Europe, Australia, Central America, and Africa to compete in the most prestigious hang gliding event in the world, the Cross Country Classic. With 72 pilots entered, this year's Classic would be the largest ever. Don Partridge would call various tasks similar to those of the Open, including one open distance day that was so grueling, exhausting, and extraordinary the competition was canceled the following day.
Date. As far as we're concerned, that's worthless. How can it go? It's not
Many of the foreign competitors had never flown the Owens Valley before. They studied the maps of the day's task carefully, knowing full well that if they were to become lost in the desert beyond the White Mountains, they could die of thirst.
Nosotros nos perdimos. Nosotros aterrizamos aquí. Tiene que seguir por acá arriba.
All right.
Pasas en montañas. Te vas por estas montañas. Una, dos. Debes de tener el camino a tu derecha. Una.
Canadian Dave Harris consistently demonstrated a polished skill with the cumbersome pod. Others were still working on some of the minor details of their technique. But for Rich Pfeiffer, all was ready. In a few short years, Pfeiffer had come from being a champion skydiver to one of the world's most accomplished cross-country hang glider pilots. All eyes were on Pfeiffer, because there were few combinations on that hill more formidable than Pfeiffer and his pod flying an Owens Valley racer. All over launch, there hung a competitive tension that had not existed during the Open or the qualifier. Rich Grigsby, a leading California pilot who had placed a close second behind Pfeiffer's win last year's Classic, chose to forego the pod, gambling that the sensation of the wind stream on his face and the sound of the wind on his sail would give him a competitive edge over Pfeiffer, letting him sense the thermal so desperately needed to win. On New Year's Day, Pfeiffer had flown his hang glider over the Rose Bowl at Pasadena to the thundering applause of thousands of fans. Presently in litigation were 104,000 counts of assault with a deadly weapon, but he wasn't going to let that bother him now.
The first Classic came, so we had the first population sample to get some statistics from. We had 46 pilots, I think, and here we all taking off every day and flying for 3 or 4 hours and this stuff. And Gary Patmore came ready to win. Bennett had called early in the season when they first announced the Classic and got a team of 6 in there, and he came up here with Mariah's man ready to sweep it, just like the Comet swept it last year. And they took off. They were just running away from everybody by 3 or 4 days out. And then Patmore the Mariah wasn't very pitch stable anyway, and Patmore detuned these wingtips. And he got up around White Mountain Peak and got stalled in a thermal and didn't recover from the stall before he continued turning and flipped upside down and folded it up and fell and barely got his parachute open as he hit the side of the hill and was rescued by helicopter. That was the first scary one. That same year, Kevin Kernahan did a foot on the bar, screaming dive down into Mount Barcroft before it pulled out into Mariah. That was the end of the Mariah, by the way.
I was going to take off, a little excited, because I was asking You know, I was declaring that I was taking off, and all of a sudden I noticed that my radio didn't work. I looked downstairs to under what was going on, and all of a sudden my wing left, and I was flying without wanting it. And I tried to, I couldn't do anything, you know. My wing turned over and tipped over, and nothing to do. So tomorrow we'll try to find another wing or to repair this one.
Well, the next year we had the XC Open and we had a fella killed in a dust devil, so that's a pretty horror story. He had every bone in his body broken in the corner. Said eyewitnesses saw him enter a dust devil within yards of the rocky face of the mountain and be thrown, impacted against the rocks. That seemed to be an obvious sort of thing that you might even expect a powered aircraft to lose control under such situations. But we had another guy flying along top of the whites in a mosquito. The mosquitoes were the prototypes, man, and they still had shiny wires and everything on them. He got in really bad turbulence, got upside down, right side up, and pretty scared, and he threw out his parachute. I guess he was in a dive upside down, and just got pretty scared. The glider hadn't broke up, but he threw out his parachute, and the parachute in deployment cut its bridle off on one of the wires, and just the deployment of the parachute apparently righted the glider, which he was then able to fly successfully back to the valley.
The second day of the Classic would mark Dave Harris's last flight in a pod. Only Rich Pfeiffer and Chris Price, the first man to fly the Owens Valley in a hang glider, would continue on with them. They were beginning to get a reputation among the pilots on the hill as death pods. Alan Reeder, during the qualifier, had had a close brush with death flying his pod. Shortly after takeoff, he had stalled and recovered from the dive within just a few feet of the mountainside.
Well, basically, I'd only had 2 flights in it before the contest, and I wasn't completely comfortable with my orientation in it. And there was some question about whether the performance advantage was enough to make up for my lack of skill in it.
The wind on Gunter could change instant by instant. Some pilots literally scraped off the hill, while others found that a tremendous burst of speed was barely sufficient.
Number 1. 1, go! Gotta wait for some wind. Shit.
The second day I was here, I entered a thermal which between Boundary Peak and White Mountain. I entered a tunnel which put me nearly on the back. I just have to pull and to switch the control bar to fall on the side. Otherwise I was on the back, because it's something I never, and I think we never can experience in Europe. So huge thermal and so sudden. And also something else, there is also big turbulence here with this wind near the cliff and the mountains and so forth. And that's also something we never experience in Europe. Also at landing, when those areas are so hot that there is big little thermal, coming from the ground when you're landing. And also the first day when I land, the first landing I did here, I did it backward, which is something I never experienced in Europe. Backward with a lot of little localized thermal, which was putting my ladder like that. So I barely did it, but I did it. I was quite happy to be alive and to broke nothing to my ladder.
The last, I think, 2 miles of the canyon, I was very low. I was watching my wings that don't hit the walls of the canyon. I was going along the bottom of the canyon. That they are not trees. The green things that you see, they are not trees. They are bushes. Just before crash, the turbulence get me up, and I passed the rock, and I was keep going.
Fast?
Yes, I was going fast. I was afraid to hit in any moment.
The third day of the Classic will stand as a hallmark in the history of hang gliding. Until that summer, only 11 pilots had ever flown further than 100 miles. But today, an astonishing 14 would exceed that mark, among them Larry Tudor. Finding himself far from civilization over the rugged mountains of central Nevada, he would turn back the way he had come, possibly having exceeded Jim Lee's 168-mile world record. A momentary windstorm forced a couple pilots down on the side of Gunter, not half a mile from takeoff. Also exceeding all world record distance hang gliding flights other than that of Jim Lee would be Tom Creechy with a fantastic flight of 157 miles, Rich Pfeiffer in the pod with 139 miles, and Mexico's Michael Gutierrez, Joe Greblo of the United States, and Michael de Glanville of France with flights of over 130 miles apiece. It was late at night when we learned that Larry had made it halfway to Utah. Don called a rest day then because lots of pilots didn't get back to the valley until the next morning. By dawn of the fourth day, Rich Pfeiffer was in big trouble. During the second race, he had left his last thermal too early to make the final glide to Mina, Nevada. Falling just short of the goal, he was penalized and forced back to fourth place. Now in a desperate bid to capture the meet, he would win the next 3 races. But even this would not be enough to close the gap between himself and Larry Tudor. He urged the other pilots to fly harder, to force Larry into making a mistake, but they were wary of losing their standings. Jeff Burnett, in third place, would try to beat Tudor the next day, but flying low and fast, he would miss a thermal and land, falling to 54th place by having made just one mistake. On the 6th day of the Classic, Don announced an elapsed time race to Mina, Nevada. The air was still and the sun was warm. The intensity of the competition seemed far removed as pilots waited patiently for conditions to strengthen. But suddenly, the peacefulness of the morning was shattered. In its own unexpected and violent way, the first dust devil had told us that the thermals were out there brewing. The wind dummy launched, hoping to find them, but they eluded him. Most of the pilots on the hill chose to wait a little longer.
Pushed out. Maybe on guard? Yeah. Where do you leave from Montgomery? Who's that? Is that Dave Harris? Pardon, what were you going to say? Where did you take off at? Right over my counter.
Even though Eric was kept out of the competition, that didn't stop him from flying. This was, after all, Owens Valley in the summertime, hang glider heaven. The South African team flew the Aolis, an unusual new design by aeronautical engineering student Carlos Morales of California. Though notorious for its fast landings, the Aolis had proven itself by capturing the world altitude gain record during the Open.
We had 6 people at once blown into the side of White Mountain Peak, essentially. The winds, when they come up, you get the canyon trap, which you flight, especially when we were flying the lower performance, slower gliders. Doesn't apply so much now to the faster ones, but it's still pretty possible to get back in a bowl or with large ridges leading into it, where you can't penetrate against the wind to get out. I think Milner Canyon's one of those canyons if you're really back and low in competition and in there with a school of minnows, and we had 6 people going to White Mountain Peak in a day, so it's hard to people walking on White Mountain Peak together. A glider from a parachute deployment from the day before weren't able to stand up in the peak. 6 gliders landed in there. We did quite a few gliders that landed in the lights this year. I don't know, I've only been inverted once in a hang glider up here, and that was a real quick incident and a very mellow spring thermal in an ASG. The only time I haven't had a parachute on in the last 5 years. But the gliders pitch stability righted it, and it was over faster than I could react. But I do hear a lot of stories about white-knuckling turbulence. I think the gist of the thing last summer would have been the prayers in Portuguese we heard from our South American competitors.
Flying north of Gunter on the way to Nevada, Eric passed above some non-competitors preparing to take off from 10,000-foot Paiute launch.
Ready, mark, red and white glider.
Right.
Jeff Burnett, though hopelessly behind, would have the 5th best time of the day.
Jeff is the best one. Bring it in just the right amount.
The desert heat made the air so thin in the afternoon that it could be like landing on top of a 12,000-foot mountain.
You have anything to say?
Nothing. Oh, where's my new down tube?
Rich Pfeiffer had the best time.
That's part 2, and this wasn't gonna be last. Hey, I'm gonna win again today. I know it.
Chris Araya would beat even Larry Tudor's time to place 3rd for the day.
Taking a 500 up offline, and that's all it looked like. I was through this, so I went over Bayou, cut down below 9 grand, and hit 1,000. Every time I got to go, I hit 1,000.
Yeah, I got up, and it wasn't, you know, I could get up high. I got to about 15, but it was blowing just mainly ridge wind and a few thermal pops. And this is why drifting was, so I just
You're
went,
going to help me out a lot. Another point.
I'm going to help myself out, too.
I know.
Steve Moyes, Australia's hang gliding champion, would place 2nd with an elapsed time close behind Pfeiffer. Great Britain's Andrew Wilson, with the 9th best time of the day, found the air a little bit different than in jolly old England. When Larry placed 4th in the race to Mina, the gap between him and Rich Pfeiffer narrowed to less than 7 points. But the next day, in a race to the Nevada border, Larry beat Rich Pfeiffer's time by 5 seconds. And with it, Larry won the cross-country classic. Rich Pfeiffer on his Comet placed 2nd. Steve Moyes of Australia, flying a Moyes Meteor, placed 3rd. Mike de Glanville of France, flying a Highway Demon, placed 4th. Tim Joseph of the United States, flying a Comet, placed 5th. Andrew Wilson of Great Britain, also flying a Comet, placed 6th. Jeff Scott of the United States, flying a Demon, placed 7th. Dave Hannes of Canada, flying a Comet, placed 8th. Butch Peachy of the United States, also flying a Comet, placed 9th. And Ted Zinke of the United States, flying a Comet, placed 10th. Well, that was a classic for 81. The next day was the big awards ceremony, but Larry wasn't there.
Conductor conduct this ceremony at the end of the fourth classic. I think maybe we're still missing one of the important members, but time waits for nobody. A few things I'd like to mention. First of all, my heartfelt thanks and regards to everybody that participated in this meet, everybody that worked as staff, partners, scorekeepers, everybody that made this possible for this year, and maybe to the mountains over there too. To an Australian pilot, one of the real founders, one of the real sons of the sport. I think we've all got a lot to say to Steve and a lot to admire in him. Right, third place for this year is Steve Moyes from Australia. Let's come on around.
The world where everybody has wings. And you just, you go to another planet for a week. It's really something to remember. And we're happy to fly here in these mountains anytime, especially when there's such a good crowd as there was this year. Thank you.
Where was Larry, everybody wondered. Well, I knew. I'd run him up Gunter earlier that day. He said he wanted to take the day off and go hang gliding.